Hi everyone, and welcome to today's CTC webinar. My name is Kyle Davis, and in this webinar we will be covering the differences between groups and links in a Revit model. Before we get started, I do want to remind everyone that this is being recorded and will be posted to the YouTube channel sometime afterward. Also, on your panel, if you have any questions during the webinar, we will go over those. If I see it coming through and we're relative to what we're going over at the time, I will answer it at the portion, or I will save time to the end to answer any questions that you might have. And with that being said, let's get right into it. So again, we're going to be going over the groups and links and the differences between some of the workflows that you can use and the different processes that happen and how they impact your model. So the problem that comes up with this is deciding whether to use groups or links and what you have the capability of doing with both. And it might be hard to pick later, and what issues might you run into if you put one over the other. So what we're going to cover, here's the outline, is we're going to cover groups first and talk about some of the processes and things that you might run into with groups, creating the different types of groups for the model versus detail, and also the attached details, copying and monitoring or copying the groups around and editing the groups, and then excluding elements. We'll talk about the processes there, and also some issues that might have come up with using groups as a choice. And then we'll cover how to convert the groups to links. This is a great process to be able to, if you do pick groups at one point and then eventually you want to switch over to a link method, we could talk about how to switch that to links. And then once we get to the links portion, I will talk about some different processes that can be used for the links that most typically used for links. In this case, I have a couple examples of some furniture and some interior work sets or links there that we can practice there, but also just talking about the difference of what can be done in a link versus what can be done in the group. So again, we'll first talk about groups. We'll talk about the model groups and how we can exclude some elements. We can move some models. We'll talk about how to create the group and manage those and what can be done to copy those and what not to do. We do have some things about some processes that we've seen in Revit that people have used, or some issues that have come up because of different techniques that people are using with groups. And we'll also talk about the detail groups and how those can impact a model and in the regards of for documentation stuff. And then again, we'll get into converting the links. And we'll talk about there's two ways to convert a link. You can do a new project or existing project. And groups, again, are very handy for creating a group that's something that's consistent around the model that you need to use several times in the project. You can group those objects and be able to place those groups wherever you need to in the project. So it's really handy to have that, and then edit one group and it edits all of them that are that same group. This is a very useful thing for furniture layout, and also it could be used for apartment buildings and hotels that have common unit layouts. We can group the unit and then be able to use that unit wherever we need to in the project. And I have some samples that I will show in this process of what you can do and potential issues you might run into with these type of groups. And then we'll talk about the details of putting in the dimensions on these. What detail groups can be used in two manners. You can create a detail group that is just simply just documentation objects. Maybe you're doing a drafting view or detailing a section and you want to use that detail later in another view. Without redrawing it, you can group those details and then put those details in another view so that you can use the exact same detail not without having to remake it or copy paste it over. And then if you edit one detail, it updates the others. And the other difference is attached detail group. And with attached detail group, these are tied to a model group. So they're kind of one and the same with a model group, but they're classified slightly different than just a detail group. Detail groups are placed by themselves and they're only 2D objects, whereas attached detail groups are a detail of the model group that you may, when you're selecting the objects, you may have some documentation stuff on that group. And if you select both the model group and the detail group at the same time, or model elements and detail elements at the same time and create a group, it will create a detail group and a model group. And everywhere you place that model group, you will be able to attach the detail group to it later. And then if you don't want it, you can remove it from one instance of the group but keep it on another, but it's still there if you ever need to turn that on in any other view you want to see it in, that detail. So let's kind of show a little bit of this. I have a sample project that I have some furniture layout that I wanted to create a group and then also some detail group to go through it. So I have a workstation layout that I have several workstations here. I have a 4-unit layout that has all these components in here that they're individual components. So it would make it really tricky. I'd have to make sure I select everything and copy this around. So that's a problem. That's really hard. Sometimes if I go to Windows Select it, I may not have grabbed everything. So if I go to copy that around, that could take some time to copy that everywhere. So instead, what I'm going to use is the group method. So I'm just going to simply select everything here and create a group, and then I'm going to call this something that makes sense. So I'm going to call this Workstations for Layout. So you can give it any kind of name you want, and then there's an option of Open Group Editor. If you check that, it basically opens the group, and you can make some more modifications to the group right away. Now, so as soon as it's created a group, it's now a single object right now. So when you select it, it's one object. And then in the properties, you can see that it is a model group. And now I can start copying this group around wherever I need to. So if I wanted to make this layout, I'm just going to sit here and copy this as many times as I need to in this project. So I can select as many model groups as I want, copy those over. But then it might run into issues like I just did here where, okay, I started copying this over, but now over here I have this model group here that's just now too big. It goes over this. So some things you can do with that is then there's the way to duplicate a group without having to ungroup it, regroup it all. The procedure there, if I wanted to ungroup it, I click on that, and then I would have to select my objects that I want to group again or delete and create another group using that. But instead of that, there is a process that we can use that basically you take this group, edit type, and duplicate. Then I can give it a new name. So in this case, I'm going to call this a Workstation 2 layout. When I duplicate it, that actually makes that group this one. So it's a new group. But now I'm going to edit this group and get rid of what I don't need. So I don't need all these objects on this side. So I'm going to delete those and finish. So now I have a 2 workstation layout. So again, I don't have to ungroup it and then regroup it, delete all the objects and regroup it. I prefer the method of edit type duplicate because then it makes it easier to make sure that all those objects are still in the group. When you ungroup it and you start deleting things and then you want to regroup it, again, you might not have deleted everything. You might not have selected everything to regroup it. So that adds that extra little complexity to doing that. So I always duplicate the group and then copy that group around. So now I can copy that one up here to have that layout there. So once I'm working with these groups, if I edit one group and make a change to this group, so if I grab this under workstation here and I pull it up, maybe I want to do that to all sides, make them consistent. and then I finish the group, every single place that that group is located automatically updates. Now the other thing is that since this is a different group, it didn't change this group over here. This is a separate instance, so that would need to be updated as well if I wanted to make the adjustments there. Now, a couple of other items with this groups is that I mentioned earlier in the kind of the outline there is there's some workflows that we can do with these groups, and I mentioned the one about the duplicate or edit type duplicating the group. There are some other issues that might arise with the group. Depending on the objects that you're using, there are some workflows that are recommended and not recommended. For example, in a case of a group, depends on the objects that we don't recommend to mirror the group. Mirroring the group in certain things can cause the group to kind of lose some instances of its kind of a definition of the object, and it might cause issues down the road when you're trying to edit that group, that all of a sudden things start to happen. Now, in my scenario here with the furniture layout, when I mirror it, I may not have any problems whatsoever. And when I edit the group and if I make any adjustments on this mirrored version of it, there's not that much difference between the two. So I may not run into any issues with this one. So when I made the update there, it did make the update there. Where you run into issues with would be more in the regards of like elements like walls or hosted objects, or in the mechanical world, MEP world, if you're grouping objects that have connections to them and you mirror those groups, that can cause those connections to break, that they can become disconnected from their systems. It might cause other issues in the schedules, so we definitely do not recommend a mirror, especially in those scenarios. Furniture layouts, again, I haven't experienced the issue, but there might be some users that have. So if any of you have experienced those issues, that's kind of the reason why it can happen, is just the mirroring is not recommended. If you needed to mirror a group in those scenarios, it would be better to ungroup the object, mirror it, and then regroup it, making a new one. I see a comment here that if you're grouping plumbing piping to a fixture, you do have to pay special attention to the fixture unit of the system, etc., especially for electrical. Yes, all those things like that, when you're grouping those, you do have to pay attention to where the group is and what it's connected to, and so on. So that is a very good point, that plumbing and electrical, and actually MEP in general, there's a lot of things you have to pay attention to a little bit more than the architectural world. Architectural world, there are a few things that we have to worry about, and I'll get into those a little bit later here, but definitely in the other disciplines, there's a lot more with groups than I'm aware of. I'm more on the architecture side, but we have seen issues with the mechanical as well. Structural doesn't typically use groups very much in their discipline. Most of their stuff is pretty generic around the things of being able to place those columns really quickly. There's not really a need to group objects and then place that group around, unless it might be like a stairwell that they want to model the beams and stairs for that, and then they group that and place it somewhere else. But just simply for placing columns, beams, beam systems, they have other tools that make it a little bit easier than just doing groups. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is I have another project I have open here that I wanted to kind of talk about, grouping objects like model or system elements such as walls, and also talk about some issues that might pop up with grouping hosted objects to something outside of a group. So here I have a kind of a hotel layout. I don't have too much in here. I have on the first floor, I have a double bed, a double queen bed, and then a king bed. And then on the second floor, I have some objects on the other side for some bedroom layouts. And I was going to show some of the creating groups for these objects and kind of talk about what you can do. So the first thing is I'm going to group this, and I'm going to select all my objects within this model here. I'm not going to group the front door. You can. I'll get into a topic a little bit later about that door there. And I'm going to create the group from this, and I'm going to call this a double queen bed. And now I can take this group that I made, and I'm going to copy it from this side to this one. Now I got the message about the wall join, and again, this is the other thing here, that I put that wall up against the exterior wall, so it's joining in there. So here's one of the issues that can arise, is now that's over there. It is now in the wall. Now I can edit this and pull it back, and it will join there, and when I finish, it still might keep it connected over here. The walls are kind of intelligent. They try to keep joining to one another, so you may not have too big of a deal there. Now, in this one, I did not add this wall over here into the group. I can, but you might run into an issue that if the wall is not supposed to be there, like if I start copying this down and I get all the way to this exterior wall here, I don't need that other wall in there. So I left the common walls out of the group. So the hallway wall and the divider wall is not part of the group. I left it out on that purpose. So I'm going to make a couple more down here. So I'm going to copy that down. Oh, actually I want to select both of these, and I'll copy down so I get that common wall in there as well. So I have this group here, and I can now edit any of these. If I wanted to make any kind of adjustments, I edit one, it updates the others. The issue I wanted to really show with the other object is hosted objects within the group. For example, I'm going to do it up here on this one. I'm going to edit this group here. I'm actually going to make this a new one so that I have a demonstration here of hosted object. I'm going to call that group hosted object, and I'm going to place a hosted object on this wall out here, the common wall. Currently I have it just as a freestanding tub, but I'm going to bring in I don't know if I have one in here. Let me quickly look. I'm going to bring in a hosted object. There is a hosted tub that comes with the out of the box, so I'm going to use that one to demonstrate what the issue could be. So now I'm going to edit this. I'm going to place that tub on this wall and finish. So now I got that group there, but now I need that group over here. Now if I copy it over, and I copy exactly on this wall here, and I copy, if I have to, notice this, I have to automatically unconstrain because it wanted to only go up. If I copy that over here, I got it. It's there. So the tub shows up. And then if I take this group again, and let's say I'm placing this group somewhere else in the project. So I'm in another location, and I want to place that group. So I'm going to place this group, pick that group, and I'm going to place it right there. Elements were deleted. And that's really because of the tub. It was in the group. It's no longer able to host anything to that. So I have to have an object there. So I'm going to move this down here to get it those elements corrected. And now in order to fix this, you have to put another element that you can host it to. So I'm going to create another wall right there. And you can see as I hover over it, it kind of snaps to it. So that's where I'm going to draw the wall again in that same location. And after I draw the wall here, it doesn't automatically correct that issue. But now if I select this, and up on the ribbon there's a restore all excluded. So when I click on that, it brings that element back. And once I bring that back, I can now use this again. So this is the issue that arises, is just that if you have a hosted object tied to an element that's outside the host, This can happen in apartment buildings, hotels, or any other group that has those hosted objects, cabinets, those sort of things that are hosted to it. And for the most part, as much as we possibly can, we do highly recommend it to be not hosted. And the main reason for this is because of groups. Especially if you're going to do groups. If you're going to use groups, you're going to have those issues with hosted objects. We recommend to convert those. Now, one question I see that came up, would it be the same for faced host? Yes. It would be the same for faced hosted because those are hosted to a face. However, those are a little bit different too, that you can, those can become orphaned a little bit better than wall hosted elements. So if you were to do hosted, face would be the best one because again, if the element's not there, face-based objects sometimes just become orphaned objects. Whereas wall hosted, ceiling hosted, floor hosted, those objects are required to be there in order for it to work. So if it possible, face hosted would be the second best, non-hosted would be the best. In those scenarios when you have those hosted objects, unfortunately there's no way to really convert them really easily to not hosted. If they're any kind of hosted, wall hosted, face hosted, or any of those, there's not a way just to convert them to not hosted. You have to remake those. Okay, so we talked about that, the issue there for the groups of hosted objects and creating groups within here. So I do want to move on here. If there's any questions on this, we will. I can come back and revisit this here in a second. But I want to move on to converting to link. So I'm going to go back to my other project that I have, the furniture layout, and just kind of briefly talk about some of the converting to link process here. Now I'm going to get rid of all of my other groups and talk about that, just this one. So when you have a group in here, I just got another question. Why isn't the toilet follow with this floor hosted? The toilet that I placed in my model is not floor hosted. It is level based, so it's actually following and it's not going to break when you move it. But if it is wall hosted, like a commercial toilet that's hung on the wall instead of on the ground, that toilet might have the same issue. But the toilet I had was not floor hosted. It is a free-floating, non-hosted toilet in my model that I had. Okay, so with the link here, the link process, when you select the group, there is a link option. And what this will allow you to do is convert it to a link instead of it being a group. And when you click the link, you get two options of replace with a new project or replace with an existing project. So the first one, replace with a new project, it will ask you to save that file somewhere. And it defaults here, same as group name. And when you save, here, include attached details, which I'll get into as well. It saves that as another file. It copies it over to that new file, and then it brings that link right back into the model. And now that object right there is now a link. So over here in the properties, it is now a link. And in the project browser, if I go down to groups and models, my groups are still there, but my link is also there. So I can still use this workstation layout and put it in the model, but I also have a linked version of it. So at that point, you wouldn't necessarily need both the group and the link there, but you do have that flexibility if you wanted to put it in there. Now I'm going to do the other one. I'm going to get rid of that link. I'm going to remove the link. So now that I'm back to just my group, and I wanted to show the other one. So in this particular object I have here, I'm going to show you what it looks like in 3D so that you can see the difference right away. So I have the workstations with some of the glass in here and where the walls are. and I'm going to convert that to a group that I already, a link I made earlier. I'm going to replace with existing, and I'm going to pick one of my other ones in here, and it's going to convert it to that one. So now if I do this, if I go back to my 3D view, oh, it must have closed it. So let me go back to 3D. And there it is. There's the one I replaced. So this one has a lot more glass going around. The cabinets up top have been moved. So it took that link and converted it to another object. Now the benefit of converting to a link instead of the group is that now this is a separate linked element. And now in regards to the furniture, it may not be the greatest thing to do. I just did it as a quick sample here. But converting it to a link for other things like maybe a unit layout or other things like that, now the unit is a separate model that someone can go in there and edit and create all the documentation, the stuff they wanted in that model, but then be able to convert the group to that in the model here, so that they're separate, but now you have it in the model that you can now copy this or link around. And again, if you update the link, it updates in your model. Now, why it leaves the group behind, not sure. That would be an Autodesk thing of that they have that set to keep it in there. It's just one thing that you just can remove afterward. Now I'm going to put the group back, and I want to discuss the attached detail groups. So I'm going to put this in here, and I'm going to copy that over, and I want to show how you can do a couple ones. So here, if I'm going to ungroup this one, and I'm going to start documenting this layout here. I'm going to start putting dimensions in here, and I'm going to put, let's say, some detail items, detail components. I'm going to put a break line in here. Just have some fun with it. So let's say I'm placing these details to document this object, call out the workstations. And then I want to be able to use this exact same thing elsewhere. So these same layouts. So if I wanted to, I can select this entire elements, including those details, and when I create a group, then in here I get to, there's the model group, and then there's the attached detail group. And what this will do is now I have two groups, a detail group and a model group, that are tied to one another. So if I place this model group again later in the project, so I called it just workstation, so I'm going to put it over here. And if I select the group, up on the ribbon is attach detail group, where I can come in there and attach that detail group again. And now that appears. And then I can delete it, or I can uncheck this at any time. So when you delete it, all it does is it doesn't attach it. So if I come in here, uncheck. So now I have that ability to do that. Now the other one is if I already have a model group here, and I didn't have the details up here, I don't have that button to say group or attach detail. But if I have more documentation over here, and I edit this, attach, and then I can give a name, and then be able to add documentation to that detail group. So I don't have anything else I can add. Maybe I'll add these over here. Oh, those are two hosted objects. Sorry. So now when I did that, when I attached the detail group after the fact, now I have that flexibility of being able to attach that detail. So you don't have to have it already grouped at the time when you do the group. You can come back, put documentation on there, and attach that back to the group. And some questions I'm looking up here is the you can unlink as easily as ungroup. So yes, if you do convert to a link, you can unlink that model. The other benefit of links versus group, I forgot to mention that when I converted earlier. When you create that link, you can unload the link. In the manage links, you can unload the links so that it turns off all the links in every single view. You do have the flexibility of groups where if you're in a work sharing environment, you can turn off the work set and it will do the same thing, as it will turn off all the groups. And speaking of the work set with groups, there is the issue here that, you know, if I place a furniture, let's say I'm on a particular work set and I place the furniture on that work set. If I create a group, it defaults the group to the work set that it was on. However, if I change that work set of the group, it also changes the work set of the object itself. So the chair I had was on the architectural FFE work set. I created the group, I switched it to the architectural elements, and now that group is on that work set as well. So you have that other thing that you have to be aware of, is what work set is that group on. And another question I'm seeing is, how does the link, or how does it affect the schedule of the items in a link? If you have it linked, you can include elements in link in your schedule. So when you go to schedule something, if you check the box to include links, it will also grab the elements from the link. If it's a group, it already schedules those elements based on the group as well. So scheduling wise, they're about the same for both. The only thing with the groups that it can help out maybe for scheduling wise is just that it's here in your model. You don't actually have to check that box and do that. Now, one feature that Autodesk, I think, did add a while back is the ability to add parameters to your links, but not groups. So if I come in here and go to add a parameter, I do have, I think in newer versions of the software, you have the ability to add a parameter to groups, or not groups, links. But for groups, I don't have any ability to add that parameter to a group. So a link might be better in newer versions of the software, where you can add a parameter to a link and then maybe have that parameter be filtered out of the schedule so that you don't see it in the schedule, but it's still there. So you do have some of that new flexibility with newer versions of the software. Oh, I must have mislooked here. There is a model group. Thank you. Yes, you can add parameters to model group. I was in my head, I was saying that, but right as I was looking here, I was looking for group. It is model group. So I was like, okay, I must have misunderstood myself there. So I apologize. You can add a parameter to that as well, so you'd be able to do that. Thank you. And another question I'm seeing to come up is mirroring and rotating groups. Rotating groups are fine. I can rotate a group and just fine. We just don't recommend to mirror the group. So we don't recommend to do that one. And the other thing, one of the other ones is tagging. You can tag the elements within the group. So I can come in here and tag any of these objects. So if I tag this chair, I don't have a furniture tag loaded, but I will be able to tag those elements in the link or the group. One thing I missed here is if you have a group placed in a project compared to a link version, one of the things you can do is you can tab to an object in the group, and then you can exclude that object from the group. So when you click the little icon there, it excludes it. It removes that object from the group. It still kind of highlights when you hover over it, but it kind of removes it from that group instant. But if I place that group again somewhere else, it still has the object. So you can go through and tab and exclude the object, as many objects as you want for that group instant. And then you can come back later and tab to it again and restore it. Or you can select a group and restore everything back to full. And if you restore an item, if you exclude an item that does actually affect the schedule, that element will not show up in the schedule because it's been excluded from that instant of the group. Therefore, it does not schedule. There is the other feature is when you tab to the object. It's not the button here, but if you right-click, there is an option in here to move to project. And when you move to project, I think I clicked the wrong one. When you move to project, that takes that instant of the element out of the group, and it now puts it in the model. So if I move the group here around, there's the chair. Now I can move the chair wherever I want versus the other group where it's still in the same location. So it moved it to the project that I can now move wherever I need to. And now if you select the group, there is the restore all. However, that will put the chair on top of one another because that chair that's now there is considered a part of the model, not the group. So I'd have to delete that, restore to get that element back in the same location. All right, so with that being said, those are the typical things with groups and links. The biggest thing with links, they'll finish up with the links portion, is we recommend to link, especially in the regards of the discipline. You have your different disciplines. Those are going to be linked models. If you're doing apartment buildings or hotels, if you're doing like the interior portion as a model, then you would be able to link those in and put those links through it just like groups, and then you can edit those to be able to modify the link. And if you're doing big projects, you might want to break up your project into multiple files so that you can link in the other. So you might have a shell model, you might have an interior model, you might have a furniture workset model. Because your project can be really big, that all in one file could just be too much for the project. Your users are having slowdowns. If you do it as links rather than groups for those type of big projects like that, you can unload those links, work faster, turn those work sets off. It works a little bit faster than groups themselves. So there's some benefits of linking versus groups in certain conditions. Groups are beneficial for, I think, for smaller stuff. When you group like furnitures and things like that, it's faster than creating those as a link. One issue I ran into with creating a bunch of units as a group was I had a pretty good sized apartment building playing with, and the groups actually slowed the model down a little bit more than links. So if it's a pretty good sized apartment building, you might consider links for the interior unit. But then you have the limited ability to exclude a element from that model when you can do that with groups. So you might have to save the link as another link. And with the groups, with the group portion, I'm getting some other ones. Things is creating a link or exporting and importing groups. With the groups, you can, if I come over here to the group and right-click, you do have the ability to save that group and then be able to copy that group in later. It's very similar to, just kind of bringing that out. And also, you can copy and paste these groups from one project to another. If you have our BIM project suite and you have BIM list supports groups, so you can put those into your BIM list browser and be able to pull those into another project as well. So we do support groups with BIM list. And with that, we'll just start going through the questions here to see if there's any I have left to answer, or if I can answer them. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and again, it is being recorded and we'll be able to watch it later. I will, at this time, I will stop the recording, but I'll keep the webcast going. If you have any questions, I'll answer those at this time.